So, you know, during landings and takeoffs, that's when we're most susceptible to error. I guess not most susceptible, but we tend to have less room for error on takeoff and landing. A small error during cruise section of flight is a major error when we're talking about takeoff and landings. So, and could cause, you know, serious problems for us. So let's talk about crosswind. So a crosswind is a wind that has a component directed perpendicular to the heading of the aircraft. So the potential of drift produced by the crosswind is critical to air navigation, can have the biggest impact during our takeoff and landing. Let's see. So airplanes take off and land more efficiently when oriented into the wind. Aircraft's ground speed is minimized and shorter runway is required to achieve liftoff. Oh. Yeah. Shorter runway isn't required. That's stupid saying. But we can get off the ground in a shorter amount of time. And the pilot has more time to make adjustments if necessary for smooth landing. As winds turn more perpendicular to the runway and become a crosswind, airplane directional control is affected. The pilot does not correctly compensate for the crosswind. The aircraft may drift to the side of the runway or side load the landing gear. In extreme cases, the landing gear may collapse. So here's kind of a picture of what we're talking about with a crosswind landing. You can see that the runway heading is and very rarely do we actually get like a direct headwind on the runway. Okay, so here's the heading of the runway. You can see that the aircraft is pointed more to the side. He's compensating for the wind that's pushing him away. Okay, crosswinds, like it says, is also going to affect our cruise quite a bit. If we're not correcting for crosswind, we may end up several miles off course and may end up, you know, let's say that we're flying from Salt Lake. So this is SLC to Denver. Okay. And we have a wind coming directly from the north as we're flying. So here's our normal flight path if we're not compensating for wind. But let's say that this is a 50 knot crosswind. You know, if we use this course rather than flying directly to Denver, we may end up somewhere more like Pueblo or Colorado Springs. I'm sorry, not Pueblo, but Colorado Springs, due to us not compensating for that crosswind. So we have to calculate that when we're doing our flight planning because it's pretty crucial for navigation. But on takeoff and landing, it's also crucial that we compensate for that. For that crosswind, because if we don't, we're not going to be landing on the runway. So this is a couple.
How fast does the wind have to be blowing to push a CRJ 700 over on a landing or takeoff?
So we can have a pretty substantial crosswind. I've sent guys to airports and they've landed with 30 knot crosswinds. It's going to affect a bigger airplane a lot less than a smaller airplane, but it still is going to affect them. If you pop this video in, you'll be able to see how much these guys are, directed, not pointing directly down the runway, trying to compensate for the crosswind. So.
It's more fun when you actually make the landing than just watching them.
Yeah.
That is true.
It gets exciting. I've pretty much maxed out the crosswind component on a Cessna 172. Maximum crosswind component, I think, is 21 knots, and I was like 20 knots. It scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, you had to have been like flying sideways in that thing.
Yeah, when we turned final, so the wind speed was like 27 knots or something like that, but it was almost a direct crosswind. So when we turned base, like our base, we pretty much just like skidded around from our downwind onto final. There wasn't really a base, but when we turned into the wind, it felt like we were just like a helicopter at that point. So I was pretty scared for my life, but got down okay. I didn't like it.
I did my...
Huh?
I said, yeah, I completely understand. I did my first like heavy crosswind landing in Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got so scared. I told my teacher, I'm like, all right, you got it. I can't do this. There's too much going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes a lot of focus. But yeah, so crosswinds. There you can see a perfect example of what crosswinds do to our airplanes. It does the same thing at cruise, can affect us the same exact way. And we literally have to fly like that all the way to our destination due to the winds. Kind of crabbing into the wind is what we call it. So gusts. So when you see gusts reported on a METAR, basically it's a variation of 10 knots or more. Okay. So gusts can be pretty scary. Gusts, we can also see low level wind shear, which is basically strong gusts of wind low to the ground, right? So we could be headwind and then all of a sudden have a strong tailwind. It could slam our aircraft into the ground. In fact, why don't we watch the video of that exact thing happening. This is due to a low-level wind shear going into Aspen. We get these a lot going into Aspen. Something to note while you guys are watching this. You can continue watching it. But watch the blowing snow on the ground, what direction it's heading when the crash happens. You can see it's pretty much a direct tailwind. I think 5 or 6 people lost their life in that one. So pretty insane. You could see that he bounced coming on the runway. So he bounced and he throttled up to go around. But as soon as he lifted off the ground, he got hit by that really hard low-level wind shear, and it just pushed him right into the ground. Just slammed him down like a rag doll, you know. So it's pretty dangerous stuff. So tailwind. A tailwind is wind with the component of motion from behind the aircraft. Tailwinds can be dangerous. We don't like to land with a tailwind, but we can land with up to a 10 knot tailwind in the CRJ. Yeah, I think it's 10 knots in all the CRJ variants and then 15 in the ERJ. So that's important to know because places like Chicago, Minneapolis, JFK, LaGuardia, Newark, San Francisco especially, they like to stay in the same runway configurations. All the planes take off from the ones. Everybody that's landing lands on the 2.8s. And they don't like to change runways unless they absolutely have to, because as soon as they change runways, all of a sudden it affects the amount of airplanes that can land at the airport in an hour period. And that can be really bad because as soon as that happens, they typically go into a ground delay program because they got to slow the amount of airplanes coming in, and everything gets delayed. So yeah. So we can land with a tailwind. It's just not something we enjoy doing. And we have a maximum tailwind component. Headwind, as long as the wind isn't stronger than our landing speed. So like a CRJ 700, say that their final approach speed is like 139 knots. As long as the wind's not going 139 knots, they can put it down. So variable wind, sudden wind shift, changes direction frequently. It's kind of like a wind shear, just not as drastic. Wind shear is change of wind speed and or direction, usually in the vertical. Characteristics of the wind shear profile are critical importance in determining the impact for an aircraft on takeoff or landing. Okay, so there's all that fun stuff we just talked about. So let's talk about some of our surface visibility problems. So mist, miniature water droplets or ice crystals suspended in the atmosphere that reduces visibility to less than 7 statute miles. That's what we call mist. Okay, how is that different than fog? Let's see, where's our fog? It doesn't have fog. Fog, I believe, is just a greater reduction in visibility. Once it hits a certain point, they call it fog. Oh, mist may be considered intermediate between fog and haze, has a lower relative humidity, 95 to 99% than fog, and does not obstruct visibility to the same extent. However, there is no distinct line between these categories. So haze, yeah, everybody knows what haze is, right? I mean, it's just like in the morning we get a haze, or it's just like pollution or something in the air that lowers the visibility a slight amount. Typically, we can still see good enough to do our landings in a haze. Smoke, a lot of things can cause smoke, right? I mean, obviously fires, but I mean, it doesn't have to be in the vicinity. I know with the smoke in the Salt Lake Valley that we've been getting from the California fires has reduced visibility to like all the way down to like 2 miles, you know, at times, just depending on how bad it is. It doesn't have to be in the vicinity of the airport to hurt us. Um, yeah, pretty self-explanatory, right? Precipitation, any form of water particles, whether liquid or solid, that fall in the atmosphere and reach the ground. So snow, rain, drizzle. Heavy snow may reduce visibility to 0. Heavy snow is dangerous. If I remember correctly, we can't even land in heavy snow with the CRJs or the ERJ. If it goes to heavy snow, they have to hold and wait away from the airport, because heavy snow, not only is it low visibility, but it is a pretty severe icing hazard at that point, right? So bad stuff. And I have seen, you know, when they forecast moderate to heavy snow, you're going to typically see the forecast visibility be pretty low at that point, and you can expect it to go lower than the forecasted. even. So drizzle usually restricts visibility to a greater degree than rain. It forms in stable air, falls from stratiform clouds, and is typically accompanied by fog. When drizzle changes to light rain, visibility usually improves because the droplet size increases, meaning there are fewer droplets in the air. Does that make sense to everybody? So just due to the quantity, drizzle can reduce visibility pretty drastically. Blowing snow. This is pretty crazy to watch happen. It happens with dust and dirt as well. We can have severe or extreme visibility loss due to it. Sandstorms, basically the same thing as a dust storm, but more drastic. In fact, they can get this bad. This is what we call a haboob. What do we call it when there's multiple haboobs in the area? Anybody know? Has anybody seen a haboob?
I never have.
So it's like a really hardcore sandstorm that just rolls in, and it looks like this picture here where it's just a huge solid line of sand blowing in. Okay. When we have multiple haboobs in an area, we call it haboobies. Oh, meteorology jokes kill me.
That's pretty funny.
But
If you ever use them on stage, you'll get killed.
that's right. But haboobs, we don't get those up here in Utah typically because we have like mountains and stuff that break it up, but we get these down in Phoenix a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I've seen them in El Paso.
Yeah, and Texas will get them, New Mexico, areas like that. But yeah, these will reduce visibility to zero in an instant. So, yeah, I was talking to somebody that lived in Phoenix last class. They said that when they were down there and the haboobs would roll in, basically cars had to stop on the road and you just stayed inside your car for like 45 minutes while it rolled through. So, volcanic ash, we kind of talked about this the other day. So, when we have volcanic ash, let me see really quick. So, we get what we call an ash tam quite often. Down here in Mexico, got two pretty active volcanoes, one just outside of Mexico City. And I can't remember the name. Oh, Popo. That's what we call it. It's like Pocopelli or something like that, volcano right above Mexico City. So, where's it at? And I wish it was on here. Anyways, we get these ash tams quite a bit down in Mexico, and basically air traffic control blocks out like a pretty big chunk of airspace that you're not allowed to fly in. They predict how far and what they expect the volcanic ash to be doing. And it's gosh, I can't find it. Maybe Mexico. Anyways, you guys get the point. Volcanic ash is bad because it turns into glass in the jet engine. Soft, sticky, molten product that adheres to the compressor turbine blades, fuel injectors, igniters. There's no air going into the engine. The fuel can't ignite. The engine comes to a slow spinning stop by spooling down, and a flame out occurs. So, to give you guys an idea of the effects of said volcanic ash, we've got this video here. I want you guys to watch it. It's about British Airways. It's 747 that it was nighttime. They didn't know that they had flown into volcanic ash, and all of a sudden they had some serious problems. They were able to land. Oh, that's stupid. Never mind on that. All right, here it is. Take a look at this. So, somebody tell me the definition of a ceiling. Remember, we went over this one.
The lowest level of broken or overcast clouds, or something or vertical visibility.
There you go. Lowest layer of broken, overcast, or vertical visibility. So,
And that's going to be from 5/8 to 1 hole, right?
Oh, broken, overcast. Yeah, basically. We don't worry so much about the percentage of sky. What we worry about is like on a METAR, if it says broken, overcast, or vertical visibility, we know that that identifies our ceiling. So yeah, it's 5/8 to full coverage, but so stratus typically is going to, be our lowest ceilings. Stratus clouds tend to drift lower and kind of blanket the sky, right? So sometimes our stratus clouds will connect with our fog or other low visibility restrictions on the ground. But so let's take a look. So it was talking about like a low ceiling. If we have an indefinite ceiling, meaning there's just a consistent layer of low visibility, then that can be more hazardous than a low layer. Um, um, so what it's talking about here is once the pilot breaks through like a low layer of clouds, so here's our ceiling, 500 feet, then typically once he breaks through that layer, he has pretty much good visibility indefinitely. But when he has an indefinite ceiling, there's no defined layer. Okay, so vertical visibility is 500 feet, but the pilot has poor slant range, is what they call it. So when a pilot's on descent, this slant range is him being able to see, what's going on down here at the end of the airport. But with an indefinite ceiling and it being reported as vertical visibility, his ceiling or his visibility is not as far. Pretty simple to understand, right? So indefinite ceiling would be things like fogs connected with stratus clouds, or smoke, mist, haze, whatever, with a drizzle connected to a low layer stratus cloud could give you that indefinite ceiling. So mountain obscuration. So a mountain obscuration is a condition in which mountain or mountain ridges are obscured due to clouds, precipitation, smoke, or other obscuration. Where's my picture? Anyways, pretty self-explanatory, right? So if we can't see the ground, if we can't see what's going on in front of us and we're in a mountainous terrain, it can be pretty dangerous for our pilots. If we look at our charts here, you can see we have what we call a minimum sector altitude, okay? And let's see here. Oh, there they are. Okay, so let's go to some mountainous terrain here. So let's look at the mountain range here. What it's saying is if we get into this area, this box of longitude and latitude, the minimum safe altitude to clear all obstacles would be 13,300 feet. Okay, that allows you to clear all obstacles by 1,000 feet. I'm sorry. No, that altitude. That one looks like you clear all obstacles by 500 feet. Approximately. So that's the minimum safe. Like you can fly that altitude and you won't run into any mountaintops. Kind of important for pilots to know, because those mountain obscurations can be extremely dangerous. All right, let's take a 15-minute break. We'll jump back on at 6:55. Let's just make it 7. Jump back on at 7. Alrighty. So let's talk a little bit about runway conditions and things of that nature. Okay, we're not going to go super in depth about runway contaminations and things like that. We call kind of the standard that the aviation industry has created is something called TALPA, and what it does is they've set up criteria as to how we identify or classify runway conditions. Okay, so when you get to an airline, you will go into great depths as to what Talpa is, and you'll talk about FICONs and things of that nature where, certain airlines have certain restrictions on how much contamination can be on the runway. It's all dependent upon the aircraft and the airline that you're with as to what their restrictions are. So we're going to touch on it. All I can say is, we talked about how much distance we have to have on a runway in order to use it as a runway, right? We talked about 60% or 70% of the runway. You guys are doing those conversions on your ADX practicing, I'm sure. Has anybody seen those questions? Like, how much usable runway do you have?
Yeah, I have.
And you have to calculate how much usable runway you have with the touchdown zone and everything like that taken out of the picture, right? So that being said, on a dry runway, sure, that's how much usable runway you have, but depending on the contaminants that are affecting that runway, the airplane may not be able to stop in that distance. So a dry runway, pretty self-explanatory, is dry, right? There's no moisture, there's nothing, like you touch the runway, it's dry. And this is, of course, the conditions we prefer, but it doesn't always happen. So wet runway, it's neither dry nor contaminated. So when we say wet runway, or when we say you cannot land on a contaminated runway, wet does not classify as a contaminated runway. Okay. So for purposes of this condition reporting and airplane performance, a runway can be considered wet when more than 25% of the runway surface area is covered by visible dampness or water that is 1/8 of an inch or less in depth. Okay, so dampness, that's the kind of the key there. It doesn't have to have, rain on the runway. Like, it just has to be damp. Sprinklers hitting the runway can cause a wet runway, things of that nature. So it's not necessarily just going to be rain or snow or anything like that. So contaminated runway, for purposes of reporting and airplane performance, a runway is considered contaminated when more than 25% of the runway surface area is covered by frost, ice, or any depth of snow, slush, or water. Okay. It has to be greater than 1/8 of an inch thick. So here are the contaminants: dry snow, wet snow, slush, compacted snow, standing water, frost, ice, or wet ice. Okay. So dry snow, basically it's not packed. It hasn't been landed on several times. So it's just dry snow sitting on the surface of the runway. Wet snow is when it gains a coat of liquid water. It may turn to ice, things like that. So it's just really damp and moist. Good for making snowballs, right? Slush, it's snow that has water content exceeding a freely drained condition. Okay. Compacted snow, it's just been compressed, right? Frost is just ice crystals that when they come in contact with the surface freeze. Water, we know what water is. Ice, I love the definition. Solid form of frozen water. Wet ice, okay, it's melting and there's a layer of water on top of the ice. Okay, so these conditions get extremely scary for airplanes, right? They also will greatly increase the amount of stopping distance that it takes in order for an aircraft to stop. And let me see here. All right, so let's pull up a dispatch release. Have we looked at a dispatch release with you guys? I can't remember. Have you guys seen these?
No.
So this is what a dispatch release is. This is what you guys will be creating, okay? This is an actual live dispatch release that has been flown. Let's see, their estimated time of departure was at 21:16 Zulu. Right now it is so this is probably yesterday. Let me see. So this was Thursday the 6th, 2020 Zulu. What time is it in Zulu right now? It's 1:12. So this was like 5 hours ago. What? Something like that? 4 hours ago? Anyways. This is a flight from St. George to Salt Lake City, Utah. You can see. You can also see the city pair up here. This was flown on a CRJ 200 426 Sierra Whiskey. Okay. 7394 was our flight number. You guys didn't see that. Doesn't really matter. You guys probably don't know who Jameis is, but he's a cool dude. Here's our pilot in command. Here's the second in command and our flight attendant. So the crew's required to be on our dispatch release at SkyWest. Our flight number, tail number, from to. This is our cruise speed, Mach 0.74. Flight level was 270. Minimum fuel was 4484. We released, the release fuel is 5,200 pounds. So release fuel, 5,200 pounds, that's sitting at the gate on the ramp, okay? This is before he takes off. The dispatcher planned him taking off of runway 1 with flaps 20. Temp is a positive 33 degrees Celsius. Landing in Salt Lake City on runway 16 left, flaps 45, 31 degrees Celsius in Salt Lake. It felt hot today. Don't know how warm it was, but anyways. So this section here, this is what we call the ATC Strip. This is what gets sent to air traffic control. This is all the information. So on this is the flight plan for SkyWest 7394. Okay, it's instrument and it's an instrument flight plan. Our airplane type is a CRJ 200. You guys will learn what all of this is. This is our equipment that is on board our aircraft. We've got things like ACARs with a printer. We've got GPS. We've got RNAV capability, RVSM, all that stuff. Anyways, okay. Our departure airport, St. George Airport, and the estimated time of departure is 21:16. This is when we expect the wheels to be up on the airplane. Okay. So this is how fast we plan to fly at. 450 knots at flight level 270, so 27,000 feet. We plan on doing the HIVCA 2 departure, flying direct, our transition point is Uriah, and then we'll fly direct to Milford VOR and do the Delta 5 arrival. Landing, our destination is Salt Lake City, and we plan the flight to take 45 minutes. And then PBN, you guys will learn all about PBN and all that stuff when you get hired. So that's a whole lot of information that air traffic control receives about our flight. Kind of cool though, right? So that's so that they can flight follow us. They know when our airplane is planning on taking off, when we plan to be at our destination, all of the good stuff like that, so that they can sequence us. As soon as air traffic control receives that, they start sequencing us into the airport, start stacking us up the way they want us to come in. All right here is all of our weight and balance and fuel planning. Our release fuel, 5,200 pounds. The Minto, who remembers what Minto is? Somebody please tell me you remember what it stands for.
Minimum takeoff or something like that?
Minimum fuel supply. So this is our minimum takeoff fuel. So when the pilot lines up on the runway, they check Minto before they can even start their takeoff. Okay, they have to have an hour and 51 minutes of fuel, or 4,484 pounds, before they can start rolling on the runway. Okay, if they have less than 4,484, they have to not take off. They have to go back to the gate and get more fuel. Kind of crazy, right?
So if there's a ground delay program in effect and they're sitting there for, so I guess how long could they sit out on an apron or taxiway burning fuel before they could take off and before they have to turn around and come back?
So Our release fuel is 5,200 pounds, and our minimum takeoff is 4,484. So they've got what, like 700 pounds, 800 pounds, 700 pounds, a little over 700 pounds that they can burn. We plan for them to take 16 minutes to taxi out, which I promise you right now is a lot more than it needs. But on the ground, taxiing, sitting out on the apron, they expect 16 minutes to be about 240 pounds. So at 700 pounds, you're looking at probably about 45 minutes that they can sit out there at the end of the runway before they have to go back and get fuel on this flight. Now we can increase the amount of taxi fuel that they have. So we can increase this release fuel number if we know that it's going to take longer for them to take off than normal. The computer automatically generates this number, and it's based on a 2-year average. And so it's just automatically generated. But if we're like in a ground delay program and we know they're going to be sitting out there longer, we can throw on as much fuel as we need to, as long as we have room for it. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
But as soon as they hit this number, it doesn't matter if they've been sitting out on the tarmac for an hour and a half and they finally have the clearance to take off. If they are below that number, they have to go back to the gate and get more fuel. They have to have that number at takeoff. So even if they're 2 pounds shy, it doesn't matter. They have to go back. And what, just kind of going back to the FARs and trying to keep you guys fresh on it, what is considered what is the fuel requirement? Like, what makes up minimum fuel supply? There's an acronym for it.
Is it bar?
Yeah, BAR. Our burn off.
Burn alternate reserve.
Exactly. So you can
Okay.
see here, here's our burn off, alternate, and our reserve fuel. Okay. At SkyWest, we do bar H, so we add in our hold fuel. But this is what these 4 things are required for takeoff. If you added those up, it would equal 4,484. Does that make sense? So that's what comprises our Minto fuel. Contingency, we have it on there, but if you add up that 47 or 473 and the 240, that would be our 700-pound difference. Okay. So the pilot doesn't have to have the contingency. In fact, the pilot can outright reject contingency fuel if he doesn't feel he needs it. But that never ever happens. Okay, we plan on them landing with an hour and 21 minutes of fuel left on board the aircraft, which is the equivalent of about 2,800 pounds of fuel. And then we plan on it taking about 7 minutes for them to taxi to the gate. And that's how much fuel they need to have on board, or that we expect them to have on board when they get to the gate. This is our weight and balance section. So you guys remember what bow is. Bow is like the empty aircraft. There's no bags or passengers on it. It's just everything that is required for the airplane to operate. So we're talking pilot, the second in command, the flight attendant. We're talking the oil, all the avionics on it, the tires, the aircraft itself. That is our bow. That's everything minus passengers, cargo, and fuel. The airplane weighs 31,713 pounds, and its center of gravity is 47.5 inches from the center of the aircraft. Does that make sense?
No, what does that mean? The 47.5?
So we call that our index. That's where the center of gravity is. So here's our airplane. Got our airplane here with our tail on here. The exact center of the plane is like right here. But with the CRJ, it is 47.5 inches forward of the exact center of the airplane.
Okay, so that changes by plane type. That's the
Yeah.
variable.
By plane type, by the aircraft particularly, each airplane has its own center of gravity.
Oh, okay.
And that being said, each aircraft type has a certain window that it has to be in. So the low end of the tolerance is going to be something like 45, and the high end is going to be something like 65 inches. So it just depends. When you guys did your weight and balance practice, you guys figured out, are we forward or aft of our weight of our center of gravity? And by how much? That's what you're doing, is figuring out, am I in that center of gravity? Am I in that tolerance that's acceptable? Because if it's too nose heavy, you're probably going to get better cruise performance, but it's going to make it a lot harder for the pilot to control coming into land and stuff like that. If it's too aft heavy, then when he'll get off the ground really fast, but it creates more drag, and you're probably going to get worse cruise performance than they should. So, and if it's too bad, I showed you guys the video of the airplane, that 747, taking off in Afghanistan and crashing because the center of gravity went too far to the back. It can cause us to stall at extremely high speeds, which is really bad. So this just tells us where this particular aircraft's center of gravity is. Okay, we plan on having 27 passengers, which is crazy for a St. George flight to Salt Lake. St. George to Salt Lake, we were constantly maxing out our CRJ 200s. We usually have 50 passengers on board. Planned payload, we expect those passengers to come to a total weight of 5,940 pounds. Max payload, self-explanatory. That's the most we can take on board. Planned zero fuel weight. So this is with our passengers and cargo on board. And the takeoff weight is how much we're going to weigh with the fuel on board. So fuel, passengers, cargo, and our bow weight comprise our planned takeoff weight. Planned landing weight is everything minus how much fuel we burned getting to our destination. And max cargo, we can have 3,500 pounds of cargo. Seating configuration, we have 50 seats on the aircraft, but we only have 27 passengers. So we're kind of running through a release right now, which is not necessarily what I planned on doing, but hey, we're here, so might as well, right? So this is our average wind and temperature deviation for the duration of the flight. Okay. Don't plan on any wind during cruise, climb, and we plan on a 1 knot headwind on descent. ISA deviation, we'll talk about exactly what that is at a later point. Our average cruise wind direction is winds from the west and at 16 knots. So it's almost a direct crosswind. Here you can see the weather for St. George Airport. This is the METAR right here. And this bottom part is the TAF. So this is the TAF. This is the METAR. Okay. And you can see the same here for Salt Lake City. Down here, we can put remarks as to, just little tips for the pilot. There's a thunderstorm developing to the south of Salt Lake City. Hold fuel planned as a precaution for any impact to arrivals. Dispatcher put that one in. The other comments there are automatically generated, as well as these other ones. This tells the pilot what the next leg for that aircraft is. It's going to switch to flight 7429, and it's going from Salt Lake to Pocatello. This is the time of departure. So this flight took off at 4:50, or they're planning on taking off at 4:55 local time. So this is our MELs. So anytime we have any MELs, this is where they're going to be listed. Okay. Right now, the MEL that we have is a passenger seat. Usually it tells us exactly which passenger seat is broken and what's broken on it, but must just not be a big deal. Maybe it's like the ashtray is broken on the passenger seat or something like that. So it doesn't affect our performance at all. Okay, who remembers what method 1 and method 2 drift down is?
Method 1 is clearing all objects to the destination airport by 1,000 feet and 500 feet on each side.
I think it's 5 miles on each side.
5 miles, sorry.
Of the
And then-
intended track.
And then the destination is clearing all objects by 2,000 feet and 5 miles on each side.
Yeah, so method 1 means that if we lost an engine on takeoff, we could make it all the way to our destination and clear all obstacles by 1,000 feet, right? So we call that the method 1 is failure at V2. If we have an engine failure at V2, we'll make it all the way to Salt Lake City without any problems. If we have method 2, we plan on the failure to happen at V2 again, but basically we won't make it all the way to the destination typically. So I don't know why the computer does it this way, but sometimes it's kind of stupid. So if the failure happens, oh, I'm sorry, method 2 is if it fails en route. It's not at V2. It's if it fails en route, we'll clear all obstacles by 2,000 feet. So for some reason, our computer would do this to us, but basically, if the engine failure were to happen somewhere between St. George and Salt Lake City, our planned destination for diversion is Salt Lake City. And yeah, I don't know why it does it like that, but typically what will happen is it'll say if the engine was to fail between St. George and Salt Lake City, your destination is Cedar City at that point. And then if it fails between Cedar City and Salt Lake City, then your destination will be Salt Lake City. Does that make sense? So usually we don't see Salt Lake City in this category with method 2. It'd be somewhere like Cedar City. And then we'd have another line there saying, if it fails between these 2 points, then your destination is this place. It's hard to explain on this one. And then here's our flight plan. So this is telling the pilot all the waypoints, all the intersections, where he needs to go, how much fuel he's going to burn between each one of the legs, stuff like that. But then we have the TLR, and we're going to talk about the TLR after our lunch break. So let's all jump back on at 8 o'clock. Dinner?
Yep.
All right. So let's talk about the TLR, Takeoff and Landing Report. This is where the pilot gets his takeoff and landing numbers, basically. If the computer were to fail, this is where he would go to get his, like, how much distance is it going to take, if the wind changes, how much do I need to correct? So the thing that I wanted to show you guys on this, that has to do with Talpa, is it shows on here. Where the crap is it? Okay. um, you can see the difference right here. So we've got dry runway, wet runway. So he was landing on 16 left is what we planned him on, right? So with flaps 45, oh, there's no difference on that one. I wish it had. You need crappy weather, I guess, to get all the extra stuff. Why doesn't this one have it? Anyways, in this takeoff and landing report, gosh, I keep getting screwed on things that I'm trying to show you guys, and it's like, well, just use your imagination. Oh, here it is. Okay. This is what I'm looking for. Okay. This is the minimum landing distance with flaps 45 with our thrust reverser credit. Okay. So if our landing weight is what we planned it at, on a dry runway, it will only take 3,784 feet to stop. Okay. If the runway is wet, then it will take 4,257 feet to stop. And if there's standing water, it'll take 6,150. You guys can see how this can go wrong incredibly fast. Okay. So think about a place like Fargo, North Dakota. Their runway is something like 8,500 feet or 65. I can't remember what it is. I think it's 8,500 feet. And then you do the calculation, how much usable runway do I have? And it comes out to be like 62,000 or 6,200 feet. You know, that's going to be really scary if we try to land with standing water, right? You can see how much it changes our landing distance. There's some that I've seen where the landing distance is something like 16,000 feet. What runway is 16,000 feet? And typically we see those during the winter because they'll have like compacted snow and stuff like that. But you can see if we don't have a thrust reverser, it's even bigger of a change. Here's our current, what we expect them to land at is 40,470 pounds. If it's a dry runway and they aren't using the thrust reverser, it's going to take 4,500 feet. But if they're standing water, it doubles it almost. It's pretty hard to stop. So that's basically what I wanted to show you guys. Sorry it took so long to get to that point. You guys will learn about the braking coefficient and stuff like that and even then they just kind of like run through it. So they pretty much give you the definition and then say, yep. So ratio of deceleration force from a braked wheel tire relative to the normal force of the acting on the wheel or tire. So contaminated runway takeoff performance data. This is what we just looked at. But this breaks it down. So dry, it's not a contaminant. Wet, it's not a contaminant. Ice is solid. Compacted snow, solid. Dry snow is a loose. Wet snow is loose. Slush, loose. And water is a loose contaminant. Okay. So what it says here, for loose contaminants, data should be supplied for the reportable contaminant depths up to the maximum contaminant depth for each of these contaminants due to the issues of potential structural damage from spray, impingement, engine ingestion, and significant effects of acceleration capability. The recommended maximum depth for takeoff operations for slush and water is a ½ inch, unless greater depths are shown to be free of structural damage or engine ingestion issues. So this is just saying, unless your offset specs say that you can land with more than a ½ inch, this is just kind of the general. If there's a ½ inch of contaminants or greater, no taking off. So, pretty cool stuff. So let's look at a airplane that ran off the edge of the runway. Let's watch this video really quick. It's only 3 minutes, so everybody pop that into your YouTubers. Whoa, right? So, ice, bad for landing and takeoff. Any questions on that?
No.
What's interesting is that they had 2 aircraft just before that report good braking action, right? Kind of crazy how they can report that and then all of a sudden we've got an accident like that. But it happens. So, kind of want to talk about like icing really quick. This link here. So it's a long one. Too long. Dang it. Maybe this one. No. Crap. So I would like you guys to watch one of these videos about icing. And kind of like take some notes on pilot error or you know what led up to the accident. And what lessons we can learn from it. That'll be your homework tonight. I want to talk about it a little bit more tomorrow. I don't want to spoil any of your guys, like, you know, end of the show. I don't want to spoil it for you guys. But do some research on either Air Florida 90 or American Eagle 4184. This Air Florida 90 icing crash is the one I recommend. It's kind of interesting.
Can you say those two again?
So Air Florida 90, it's on your Google Drive. If you look at your Google Drive, this video links, it's right here. You watch this YouTube video. But Air Florida was a pretty interesting, has a lot to do with something that we're going to talk about next week, which is like human factors, human errors that they've kind of identified as the psychology of pilots and some of the factors that lead to the most accidents. We're going to be talking about those next week a little bit. Actually, we'll do that tomorrow. So it has a lot to do with that, and it has a lot to do with icing. So why don't you guys, I'm just going to limit it to this Air Florida 90. What I want you guys to do, like I said, take notes, identify what the pilot's errors were involved in the accident. Take notes as to like the icing and aircraft conditions, the airport conditions, everything that kind of led up to this crash. And we'll talk about it tomorrow in class. Let's see. And then tomorrow we'll also talk about, I told you we were going to investigate the Delta 191 microburst crash. We'll talk about that tomorrow as well. But I'll leave you guys with that Air Florida crash. Do your research, investigation on that. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll let you guys go early to watch the video because the video is an hour long. But